Recording in progress.
Thank you for joining us for today's webinar titled Analyzing and Reporting Data. Now, this session is mostly geared towards AmeriCorps Vista members who work with data at their host sites. Whether you analyze data regularly or are just getting started, today's session will give you some useful skills you can take with you in your career and life. No matter your role in your Vista project, we are very happy to have you here today. My name is Chris Hawks. I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer, or RPCV, who served in Belize from 2010 to 12. I'm joined by Sharon Asanganye, who will be sharing with us today. Welcome, 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 Sharon.
Thank you, Chris. I'll share a bit about myself. I am an international psychologist with a focus on systems and organizations. I've enjoyed seeing all the things that are popping up in chat. I live and work from a space of consulting, and specifically, I sojourn with companies to redesign systems using a culturally responsive and participatory approach. I enjoy traveling, good food, creating great memories with loved ones, and all things generative AI.
Thanks so much for being here, Sharon. And I will be passing it back to Sharon in just a second. But before that, I just want to look at our agenda. So during our time today, we will briefly review the data lifecycle, discuss types of data, and introduce the concept of data reliability. We'll also shift our focus a little later on to reporting and visualization and explore some data storytelling techniques. Again, we'll finish our time together with a Q&A session towards the end, and we hope you will leave with some tools to understand, to organize, and effectively share data in your Vista service. We'll also have a few reflection activities throughout the presentation today in which you can use your handout. We just dropped a link. Tessa dropped a link to the handout there. It also should have been emailed to you today as long as you were registered by yesterday. But we can always share these links with you if you need them. Just let us know. And also just to note, this webinar is a companion to some new e-learning courses that are on the Vista campus that explore the data coordinator role. We'll drop a link to that in the chat. Yep, Tessa already did. Thanks, Tessa. So if you want to check that out, we encourage you to explore the new courses at the link shared in the chat. We hope that through, the online courses, the e-courses, as well as the content in this webinar, that we'll have the opportunity to learn more about, this complex and important topic in the Vista community. So definitely check that out afterwards if you haven't already. That link is also in the handout if you need it. Okay, I'm going to pass it to Sharon to start us off.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much. All right, we're transitioning. I was just noting a comment in chat. Let's begin by looking at how data flows through a project from start to finish. Okay. We'll walk through 5 key steps in a data lifecycle: plan, collect, prepare, analyze, and inform. To make this concrete, we'll see how these steps work using a food security program as an example. I'll share each step, and I want you to think about how it might apply to your own work. To learn more about using a framework like this, check out, as Chris mentioned earlier, the Data Coordinator Role Learning Path on the Vista campus, or review the guide by PolicyWise. The links are in the chat, and we'll continue to share these links, and you can also find them on your handout. Before we jump into the data steps, let me paint a picture of our example program. Imagine we're all part of a community food distribution program that partners with local food banks and grocery stores. Every week, we set up in different neighborhood locations to provide fresh produce, staples, and prepared meals to families. We work with volunteers who collect donations, organize distribution events, and connect with our participants. This food security program has many moving parts, from tracking food donations to understanding who we serve and measuring our community impact. So in the planning stage, we ask things like, what do we want to learn? We might track how many families we serve, the pounds of foods given out, and who we're reaching. This helps show our impact. In the collect stage, we are gathering the actual data. Picture volunteers with sign-in sheets at food distributions, weighing donations on scales, and noting down zip codes. In the chat, please share what challenges have you faced when collecting data at your sites. Thank you for sharing that. I'm noting not all volunteers want to check in. Getting enough responses, that tends to be a struggle. It's never 100%. Thank you so much. Yes, all of these. There's so many different challenges. Thank you for sharing. One type of data that is vital to understanding context is observational data. And that's what we see. It might include the things you notice or the issues you spot. The preparing stage is focused on organizing, organizing, organizing. You're putting everything into a central tool like a spreadsheet. I know that quite a few of you were noting database and working with different databases. So that's an example. You're giving the data clear labels, removing duplicates, cleaning it up, and making sure all your measurements match. Don't forget to back everything up. For our food distribution example, preparation may take the form of making sure food measurement units are consistent or information is labeled appropriately. Curious to hear from you. What's one way you currently organize your data? Please share your response in the chat. Yes, Excel sheets are always the default. They're easy, they're accessible. But as you'll notice, as the volume increases, it gets to a point where you need to move Excel into place, especially if you want to manipulate it and ask query of the data. Let's move on to the next stage. When we enter the analyze stage, we're looking for the story in our numbers. How many families did we help? What's the typical amount of food per family? Where are most of our participants coming from? We also need to be honest about what our data can't tell us. Now let's zoom into the final crucial step, which is inform. This is where all your careful data work becomes a story that moves people to action. Informing is about sharing what we learned. For our food security program, we'll create clear visuals showing the program's growth, trends in food distribution, and the neighborhoods we're reaching. Then we can package our story and visuals into a report that makes sense for our audience, whether that's our supervisor or community partners. So thinking about your audience that you work with and that you inform, drop in the chat who typically reads your reports. All right, I'm seeing supervisors. It's yes, supervisors and directors tend to be the most reported, the person who's reading the reports. Fabulous. Thank you for sharing. Just like you've shared, everyone has different needs. Your supervisor might need quick numbers for a board meeting. A funder might want to see detailed impact metrics. Before we move into the next section, let's pause for a quick poll question. I'm going to pass it back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Sharon, and thanks to everyone responding in the chat. There's a lot of great activity, and yeah, as Sharon mentioned, we have a poll question for you here. What we want to know, we just want to know which tasks you perform at your Vista site. So do you collect new data, analyze existing data, create reports, manage data systems, communicate data findings, or any other task? So you could select all. We're just kind of curious, like, is there one that you are doing, that we see Vista members doing more than the other on this call. And this will be a quick poll, but it looks like many have already responded. I'll give it another 10 seconds or so. Make sure everyone gets a chance to select. And if you are selecting other, please feel free to drop that in the chat. All right, it looks like it's slowing down. Yeah, I see a couple coming in. I'll give it 3, 2, 1, and we will end the poll. All right, so thank you for sharing. I'm going to pass it back to Sharon, but looking at the poll results, looks like collecting stage and communicating data findings are top here, Sharon.
Yes, I agree, Chris. It looks like there's a in the beginning and the end, and there's a few in the middle. Yes, and it's actually a really good spread as well too. Because even though they're collecting new data and communicating data, the analyzing data is also quite close with the rest. So let's look at some different types of data. Data can take many forms, and as an AmeriCorps Vista member, you'll encounter various types of data in your work, from detailed program metrics to compelling personal stories. Understanding how to work with different data types is crucial for effective community service. So let's explore the two main types of data you'll work with as a member. We have quantitative data and qualitative data. So I want you to think of quantitative data as anything that you can count or measure with numbers. For instance, when you're tracking how many people attended your program last month or collecting demographic information about age groups in your community, that's quantitative data. It's anything that you count. Qualitative data, on the other hand, it tells us about the experiences and the context. So when you're conducting interviews with program participants, gathering feedback through observation, or collecting testimonials about how a program impacted someone's life, that's qualitative data. Now, both types have their strengths and challenges. Quantitative data gives us really clear metrics and numbers we can track over time because we can count them, but it might not tell us the full story of why those numbers look the way they do. For example, you might know that the program attendance dropped by 30%, but the numbers alone won't tell you why. On the other hand, qualitative data helps fill in these gaps by providing rich context and personal stories. However, it can be more subjective and might reflect individual perspectives rather than broader patterns. So let's dig into how we can work with both types of data responsibly. When working with quantitative data, we need to watch out for selection bias. Are we only counting certain groups while missing others? We need to account for response bias. Are our surveys designed in a way that influences answers? Could be leading. Sample size bias. Do we have enough data to draw meaningful conclusions? With qualitative data, some common biases include interview bias. How might our presence influence what people share? Confirmation bias. Are we focusing only on stories that confirm our expectations, therefore having a narrowed view of what's happening? Cultural bias. Are we interpreting responses through our own cultural lens? I want you to remember that the goal isn't to eliminate all bias. It's just not possible. The goal is to be aware of potential biases and account for them in how we collect and interpret our data.
Thanks, Sharon. All right, so now we'd like to hear from you through a word cloud activity. So we're going to drop a link in the chat, or you can use your phone to scan the QR code on screen if you prefer, and then if prompted, enter code 62287373 that you see at the bottom of the screen. Tessa just dropped the link in the chat as well. So for this activity, we want to know what types of data you work with most often. So we want to see what the big number comes up. Is it program performance metrics, demographic information, fundraising data, or something else similar? So once you're in the form, we'd ask you to type and submit your response in the field. I think it gives you an option for three, but you can type, if there's only one, that's totally fine. And we'll give this, I don't know, uh, about 30 seconds or so. Make sure everyone gets a chance, can start to see them come in. Okay, and Sharon, I'm going to pass it to you as more responses come in. Just I'm curious to your thoughts on if the larger words in the center are the ones you expected.
Thanks, Chris. I'm watching it and I'm giggling internally because it tends to be the quantitative often takes the lead. And as I'm looking at this, the usual demographic information counts because it's easier. It's more it's more accessible. You can find and measure things. You can look at hours. You can look at attendance and participation. So quantitative data often tends to be what we're most familiar with and the types of data we work with. But as I highlighted earlier, there's a limitation with that. And that's where qualitative, I think, really comes into present a really good picture. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. This was interesting to read and not surprising, but interesting. So let's pause and reflect a little bit. Let's just as we've gone through and talked about the different types of data, let's think about the data we use. I invite you to take a moment to pause and just reflect. Think about the types of data you currently have access to and what might be missing. What context might help you better understand this data? For example, if you're mostly looking at program performance metrics, like attendance, the things that you're counting, you may want to consider that the program exists within its community context and think about what information from that community might give you a fuller picture. You're welcome to share your reflections in chat, or you can just reflect them internally. So we're going to pause and reflect for a little bit. Great. I'm noticing there's a lot of feedback closing the loop. The qualitative that's coming up. Great. Thank you. And continue to think about the ways that you can augment what you currently collect. We're going to transition now and shift gears into data reliability, which is our next topic. This is the idea that the person collecting and analyzing data can influence its conclusions. So think about a bathroom scale. If you step on it 3 times in a row and get widely different numbers each time, would you trust that scale? Probably not, right? That's what data reliability is all about. Data reliability simply means how consistent and trustworthy your information is. When we say data is reliable, it means we get similar results if we collected it again in the same way. We talked a little earlier about the 2 classifications of data types and common biases, qualitative and quantitative. Let's talk about data bias now in simple terms. So let's imagine you're taking a photo of a large group of people, but your camera lens can only capture the folks standing in the front row. Would that single photo tell the complete story of everyone who was there? Not really, right? That's similar to how data bias works. Data bias happens when the information we collect doesn't represent the full picture, when some perspectives or experiences are either overrepresented or left out entirely. Now that we understand how various factors can influence our data, let's talk about what we do with this information once we have it. After all, collecting data is just the beginning, as we noticed earlier. We need to make sure we're organizing and storing it in a way that's both useful and responsible. Noting also in the beginning, some of you were talking about data security and data privacy, so all of those come into play. Reliable data starts with good housekeeping. If we can't find it, can't read it, or can't trust it's the most current version, it's not reliable, no matter how carefully it was collected. So let's start with data cleaning. Think of this as your quality control process. It's how we make sure our data is accurate, consistent, and usable. Here are some basic data cleaning steps that can save you hours of headache later. 1, standardize your format. Imagine entering dates. Should it be month, day, year, or day, month, year? Usually, it's advisable you pick one format and you stick to it, because later on, once you have a high volume, like thousands of data, having consistent dates makes a lot easier when you're doing analysis. Check for duplicates and decide how you'll handle multiple entries for the same person or event. Address missing information. What do you do with incomplete entries? Maybe someone forgot to fill in their age or zip code. Now let's talk about storing this clean data. This is about more than just saving files on your computer. Think of data storage like organizing your kitchen. You want to know where everything is. You want to make sure that you're keeping private information secure. You want to make sure others can find what they need and prevent accidentally losing important information. So here are some key practices for storing your data. Clear file names and dates. I'll always emphasize, the more you can have a structure of storing, the better you are later on when manipulating the data. Create a consistent folder structure. For example, you might have folders for program data, attendance, surveys, and impact reports. And always make sure you back up your data. I personally use the 3-2-1 rule. It may seem a lot, but it saves you, again, a lot of headache in the future. Making sure that you have 3 copies of your data and you have 2 different types of storage and 1 copy that is stored offsite, so you can always work on it offline. Let's talk about something really important that can sometimes get overlooked when we look at our data. Remember, your programs don't exist in a vacuum. They operate in a complex community environment where lots of things are happening at once. So let's revisit our earlier example. Imagine you're running a food distribution program and you notice your numbers dropped significantly last month. Your first thoughts might be, what went wrong with our program? But let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Maybe a bus route change, making it harder for people to reach you. Perhaps another organization started a similar program nearby. There could have been a major employer in the area that either laid off workers or hired more people. Maybe it was just a month when seasonal jobs in your community tend to increase. Remember, you cannot remove all biases, but you can control for most of them. For example, you can document external changes, creating a simple, like a community context log where you track things like community events and significant changes. You can gather multiple perspectives through different sources before jumping to conclusions about your program. This might include things like surveys, focus groups, or interviews. Use consistent data collection, cleaning, and storage methods. Remember, good data isn't just about the numbers, it's about understanding the story behind those numbers. We'd like to hear about your experiences with data quality. I'm going to pass it back to Chris now for a quick poll question.
Thanks, Sharon. So yeah, we want to hear from you in another poll. It should pop up in just a second. And for this, we're asking, what are some challenges you've experienced with data quality? I've seen a couple already in the chat, but yeah, be curious to see what the number one item is here. You can obviously select all that apply, whether it's all A through H or just one. Totally up to you. Can see the responses coming in, and yeah, we're almost halfway there, so give it a little more time. Um, Give it about like 10 more seconds. And if for any reason you don't see the poll pop up, feel free to drop your answer in the chat. Totally fine. Oh, all right, slowing down. Gonna give about a 5-second countdown. Little drum roll. And let's close it out. Okay, a lack of standard data collection methods, missing information, and low sample sizes all are about 50% or more. Sharon, was this expected?
Yes, again, not surprised. The missing information and lack of standard data collection methods tends to be something that I've experienced multiple times. And even when I do my own data collection, missing information, you can have a survey, you're missing information. I'm also going to note, Chris, there was a question in there that connects to this. I'm going to try to pull them all together and address it. In terms of missing information, that is a call that you have to make, but you have to create a protocol around that. So if it's missing information, for example, it's a personal identifier, then that is something that you may have to drop that information from counts. The only time that I would keep something where like the name is not present is if it's connected to an outcome. So if they answered the outcome focused questions like on a survey, I would still keep that and I could make up a name for that individual so that I'm counting that as well. But if it's something that is a pre and post where you have missing information, especially when you want to do some deeper analysis, sometimes you may end up having to drop certain missing information because it would skew your data. And when you do your analysis, of course, you will then note that you're missing information and this is what you're doing. There are like deeper statistical tests that you can run to account for that and do like weighted measures. But for the most part, if you were just to drop and just look at that and you're not making a correlation or causation type information statement, then you're fine with being able to manipulate the missing data. So I hope that helps with deciding when you drop and when you count. It really depends on the type of analysis you're going to do with that data and what information you're going to take to then do something with it. All right. So let's continue forward. I do want to mention a quick thing about biases though. There's the Harvard implicit bias test. So if you really want to know the ways in which your biases might show up and influence how you approach and understand and analyze data, it is a helpful way to practice and cultivate a practice around self-awareness because we do all have implicit biases. Biological function, but not always helpful in different situations. So let's dive into the reporting of data. To make your data impactful, it is important to tailor your reports for different audiences. For example, community stakeholders might need accessible and relatable information that highlights impact. For team members and leadership, things like actionable insights and program outcomes might be more useful. Funders are often focused on how your data shows alignment to your project or program's goals. Now let's talk about one of the most powerful things we can do with our data. We can tell a story with it. A good data story takes the information you've collected and really connects it to a clear narrative. On the next slides, we'll share a framework for data storytelling and use the food security program from earlier as our example. So let's start with our project goal, or why we're here as a food distribution program. Our mission is crystal clear: help our local food bank better understand and serve our community through smarter data practices. Community context is a description of the community, its challenges and opportunities. According to county data from Feeding America, the community faces high levels of food insecurity, with a food insecurity rate of 19% and 57% of households being below the SNAP eligibility threshold, which is 130% in this location. These aren't just statistics, even though it's easy to just look at them that way. When we say 19% face food insecurity, we're talking about the family down the street who skips meals to pay for medicine. When we say 57% are below the SNAP threshold, we're talking about working parents who have to choose between paying utilities and buying groceries. These numbers helped us understand not just the scale of the food security issues in our community, but also how many people might still need our support. Baseline data is a starting point that shows why our project is necessary. Prior to the project, the food distribution program only tracked the amount of food they received and had no formal system for tracking the number of families served, the pounds of food distributed, or demographic data of recipients. They were doing great work. However, they did not have a clear documented impact. They knew they were helping people, but couldn't tell exactly how many or who they were reaching. Interventions are the actions we take to address the identified need. So what did we do? We built a simple and effective system to track three key things: who we're helping, how much food we're distributing, and where it's going. Think of it like creating a clear roadmap for the food bank's journey. It's really important to identify and understand our partnerships and collaborations because we don't work in isolation. We didn't do this alone. We learned from another food distribution program that had already figured out some of these challenges. Local university students helped crunch the numbers, and our amazing volunteers brought it all to life on distribution days. Impact. Impact stories are anecdotes and testimonies that highlight our project's significance. Numbers tell part of the story, but let me share what one mom told us. She said, "Now that I'm not spending every dollar on groceries, I can finally take those night classes I've been dreaming about." Now let's take a look at our results. In just 6 months, we went from guessing to knowing. 500 families served, 10,000 pounds of food distributed, and 60% of families reported eating more nutritious meals. Now, challenges and adaptations, those are also part of the story. Did everything go smoothly? Not at first. Some volunteers worried the new data collection system would slow things down, so we simplified it and provided training. Now, those volunteers are our biggest champions. Let's think about fairness considerations. These include how our project addressed fair and comprehensive access. We made sure everyone felt welcome and respected. For example, we made forms available in multiple languages. Each form included clear explanations of why we were collecting the information, and participation was always optional. The sustainability plan explains how our interventions will have a lasting effect. We didn't just build a system, we built a toolkit that anyone can use. We trained the team so these improvements stick around long after our project ends. Finally, we need to share our future outlook. Where do we go from here? We're looking at reaching more neighborhoods, working with more partners, and getting even better at understanding our community needs. Once we have our data story, we need to share it. That's the whole point of the narrative. So this is where visualizations come in handy. Visualizations include anything that you use to share data graphically, such as charts or infographics. They can help you bring your data to life and make it easier to access and understand. Some common data visualization tools are, as you noted earlier, Excel. Excel tends to be the go-to. Canva, Tableau, we also have Google's Looker Studio, which you can use to create a variety of different visualizations like charts and infographics. We'll continue with a few examples of visualizations that help clearly and effectively share information, but this is not the exhaustive list. So let's start with the first visualization. Think of a performance dashboard like the dashboard in a car. It lets you see what's most important at a glance. So for your program, a dashboard would show things like key metrics that help you quickly spot trends, make decisions, and share impact with others. A number of you mentioned being able to share data with your supervisors. Dashboards come in very handy with being able to communicate that. It's the difference between looking at a spreadsheet full of numbers and seeing clear visual signals that tell you if you're on track or need to adjust your course. As we walk through these examples, I'll be sharing some best practices to make your visualizations both impactful and honest. Depending on the type of visualization, these tips may or may not apply. First, remember to add a legend when using different colors or patterns so that people understand and can read it. You also want to keep your intervals consistent. So for example, don't jump from 5 to 10 to then 100. Keep the intervals consistent. And finally, try to use the same scale when you're comparing multiple charts side by side so that it is relevant and accurate. Visual elements combined with numbers tell a more complete and memorable story. When you pair a striking image or a clear graph with specific data, you help people both understand and feel the impact of your work. When creating this type of visualization and in general, it's helpful to use a descriptive title that tells people what they're looking at. Also, remember that some people are colorblind, so try to avoid red-green combinations. And always make sure that there's enough contrast so that the information that you're presenting, people can read everything clearly. A pie chart is helpful for reports because it instantly shows parts of a whole. It's one of the simplest ways to help anyone, even those who aren't comfortable with data, quickly understand how different pieces make up your total picture. For this kind of graph and others, it's best to use colors that are easy to distinguish and avoid those 3D effects that can distort the data, and it also affects accessibility needs. You also want to be careful with pie charts when you have many small segments of data. Then it's not as helpful because you can't really see the different slices. Like when you have like 0.5%, 0.2%. Let's look at this tree visualization. It's a perfect example of making data friendly and meaningful to everyone in your community. Instead of just showing numbers in a spreadsheet, this tree image helps tell the story of how our community is growing together. When creating visualizations like this, always make sure that you're labeling your axis clearly and try to keep it simple. You usually don't need more than 3 to 4 colors, and you also want to avoid overcrowding your visualization with too much information. A line chart is particularly helpful when you want to show changes over time. It makes it perfect for funders and program administrators who need to see clear trends and progress. When making graphs like line charts, remember to include units of measurement. It's also important to start your number scales at 0 when comparing sizes or amounts, and make sure you don't cut off your axis to make differences look bigger than they are. Next, I'll be passing it back to Chris for a scenario-based question.
Hey, Sharon. So yeah, we'll pause here to assess how well you've been following along. So a poll will pop up on the screen in just a moment. But before that, before the poll pops up, I just want to set the stage because this question is rooted in a scenario. So imagine that you are an AmeriCorps Vista member working with an after-school tutoring program that aims to improve academic outcomes for at-risk students in your community. So this program, it provides homework assistance and tracks student progress in math and reading. And your role as the VISTA member is to help the program improve its data collection processes, ensure data reliability, analyze results, and create compelling reports to share with parents, school administrators, and funders. So that's just kind of the background for this question. You know, you're at this after-school tutoring program working with data. So here's our question. While analyzing the data, you observe that students who attend more sessions show greater academic improvement. So what steps should you take to minimize bias in your analysis? So we'll give you about maybe 30 seconds to respond and come back in just a moment. Okay, looks like it's slowing down. So if you're mid-response, be sure to hit submit. So let's go ahead and end the poll and close it down. Aisha, this is my real life scenario. Well, that's good. Let's see how the responses came in here. So we'll reveal the best answer here, which indeed is B. Looks like 78% of you got the correct answer for B. The second most responded was C, avoiding bias by using only quantitative data. That wouldn't be it here, but for B, consider other factors such as parental involvement and school attendance that might be able to minimize bias in the analysis. But great job, everyone. Thanks for your participation there. I want to look at a couple of items. I know Sharon has covered quite a bit of ground today, and we want to empower you to keep moving forward and improving your skills. So we do want to drop some resources that we recommend you review for further study. So on screen, we've shared the Policy-Wise Data Lifecycle and a TED Talk from Chimada Ngozi Adichie. Both links are also in the chat, and they are also in the handout for today. The full resource list is in the webinar handout. So it has some great tools for understanding data frameworks, bias awareness, and data visualization. Definitely encourage you to check those out. Okay, we're actually going to get to some Q&A in just a second. We'd like to shift gears and ask that you think about this webinar and offer your feedback on it. Your input is very valuable to us, and we review the content, we review your comments and notes, because we want to improve these presentations for future versions and future topics that you may recommend. So yeah, please take a couple of moments to complete a brief survey. It's pretty quick. And thank you in advance for sharing your feedback. And while doing that, we can look at some questions that come in. And I will just say I have not seen many questions in the queue, Saw a few in the chat earlier, and I know Sharon addressed a couple, but if you have a question, please drop it in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. I do see one question here, Sharon, that is in the queue. As we run our program and collect data, we're realizing that we need to make changes in our questions. Any advice on this as it relates to data consistency?
That's a great question. And that I would say that is that happens where as you're doing something you learn. I've had experiences where when you are running a survey, you start realizing, oh, we should have asked this question, or we could have framed this question a little bit differently, or people are misunderstanding. So some of the work I'm gonna bring us back to the life cycle, the preparation part, the planning part is super critical because you want to look at the you want to look at opportunities where you can pilot test because that'll help you understand some of the things that need to be tweaked and whether people are understanding the questions as you're asking them. And so you could do that like survey check with groups of people to make sure that you understand that part. Unfortunately, we don't always have that luxury, right? To start from a place of like pure scratch. We're coming, we need to collect data, we have to show impact, we have to track something, we have to count something. So in this situation, not sure how far you are in the data collection process, but you might want to consider like a version control. So essentially, figure out the changes you want to make, and then the data you've already collected, you're gonna keep it somewhere else and then launch your new survey. And so figure out when that transition time is also critical, so that you're not interrupting. That's why, when we have updates, like, my phone is like updating, it updates at night when people are less likely to be in system. So there's that part of it. So that way you can make analysis. The other part is if the changes you're making are not significant, then you can still do that so that you can bring your you can aggregate your data and do analysis that way. So those are some things to consider, and also just think about like how are you going to analyze that. Essentially is what I'm leading you to is once you do the switch, it's okay to do it because sometimes the questions we need to ask really need answers, and it's okay to do it. The timing of it matters, how you analyze the data separately, and then where do you find points of connection for the groupings of the data.
Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, it looks like a couple more have come into the queue. Again, feel free to drop your question in the Q&A. So looking at the queue, okay, let's see. Miriam says, when we notice that there isn't a data organization structure and we want to improve that, how should I bring that up to my supervisor without overstepping?
That is a great question because it's often when you see the need and trying to find a way to communicate it so that you're bringing in buy-in, um, can be a challenge depending on the relationship and who is present and who you're navigating. I often found it most helpful leading people, connecting the dots. So whether it's identifying like the gaps and where the opportunities, like I am noticing that this is happening here and we're expending a lot of effort trying to figure this out and it's not connecting here. So what you're doing is, just surfacing some of the needs. And if you have like team meetings or opportunities where you can connect one-on-one with your supervisor, those are opportunities where you can just elevate things that you've already mentioned and notice along where the way we're moving is not the most efficient and the thoughts that you have. So I've found in my experience, I can't speak to all, when I am when I have direct reports and they're coming to me and they're looking for thought partnership or they're bringing solutions or things they're thinking about, it gets me excited because we're about to collectively solve for something. So I wouldn't go on and just, point out like, oh, you have no data organization structure, or you can benefit from a data organization structure, but you want to connect where are the pain points. And especially if your supervisor is part of the space, for example, if they're often having challenges with having to access contact information or having like a performance dashboard, then you could say, hey, I just attended this really great training and they're talking about performance dashboards and the things that they can do for you. I think we could consider integrating that so that the data is available and people can access it, or we can like collect and centralize it. So leverage this training as an example of I learned something new, and what are your thoughts about it and how can we integrate it into the work?
Great advice, Sharon. Thank you so much. And that does kind of tie into one of the other questions in the queue from Trinette. So thank you all for these questions. So let's see. How do I maximize the qualitative data collected from workshop feedback data, open-ended questions? So how do I maximize the data collected from it? Yeah, I think I have that question right from Doris.
Great question. I'm a mixed methods person, but I do love qualitative data because it gives such beautiful insights. So with the workshop, looking at the open-ended questions, sometimes people could speak to the ways in which you can enhance the workshop. I've had situations where there's been noticing and insights like, oh wow, yeah, it would be great if we had a break here or we had this activity framed this other way. It might have landed better. So those are examples in which like you can bring in open-ended questions. Sometimes open-ended questions create insights where you can consider maybe there's a part two workshop here because I'm seeing a trend in what people are saying that, oh, we wish we had more time or we wish we spent more time here. Those are opportunities of like how can we either enhance existing workshop or bring in workshop part two, because we're hearing this from people and it's clearly there's a trend with what people are saying. So open-ended questions are always like beautiful insights that you just need to sit and analyze and code, and you don't have to necessarily go and study and be a qualitative expert, but when you read it, you will see frequently used words or tensions that are being highlighted, and that gives you insight into where can this information inform the learning experience or the process leading up to the learning experience or any processes we have after the learning experience. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Sharon. And yeah, we might have time to fit in one additional question. See a question from Elise. How does the consideration of the personal involvement of the family prioritize unbiased reporting?
I'm going to take it as reference to the scenario. That's what I'm assuming, unless I missed something in chat. Is that, I'm assuming
Oh,
so.
they're asking about the scenario. How does the consideration of the personal involvement of the family prioritize unbiased reporting? Oh, from our scenario question. Yeah, that's I guess that is what they are referring to. So yeah, Sharon, I guess they're asking why wouldn't it be C, where we talked about avoid bias by using only quantitative data for analyzing the data. Do you want to touch more on that?
Yes, because if we go back to like the beginning, just high level, when we talked about quantitative data, we're just counting things that we're seeing, we're counting measurements. So in this situation where we're looking at like academic outcomes, there's a key part of the scenario, which is at-risk students in the community. And so if you're just looking at the numbers, which is like we provide homework assistance, and then there's progress in math and reading. If you're not considering the context of each student, which is where the qualitative piece comes in, if you're not considering the context of the young person, then you're missing information that will help you understand, well, why are they progressing at the pace? They may be progressing faster, they may be progressing at a different pace, or sometimes it can go backwards. You know, sometimes you get pre-test and then you have the post-test and it's worse than the pre-test. And you're still in a place of trying to understand what that looks like. So yes, it is incredibly important at that point that you do consider what this personal involvement of the family look like, the context. So in my earlier, I talked about what's happening in the community. What is happening in the context of the learning experience outside? Because we know learning doesn't only happen in the space where you're providing assistance, it's also what happens in the support that's received outside from that.
so much, Sharon. And I know a couple of other questions popped up in the queue, and we could try to answer those
Sure.
privately. But yeah, probably should move on because we're getting close to the top of the hour. But thank you so much, Sharon. All right, just a couple of notes before we log off. But again, yeah, if you still have questions, continue to submit those. We'll continue to try to answer those in the Q&A. But also, just a friendly reminder that we'll be posting the recording in the handout used today on the Vista campus later this week. Once done, we'll send you a quick email notifying you. And to access the materials, you just need to log in and locate the learning path. Once logged in, you can click on catalog at the top. That will bring you to the learning paths available. You may have to sort once you get there, but you can find today's webinar will be posted under the data coordinator role learning path. So you can either search for this or filter by members or kind of scroll down. And again, we just want to plug those other e-learning courses that really accompany this webinar that will be in that data coordinator role learning path. You'll see a couple other courses. Some focusing a little more on the analysis side. So if you're doing that, you may want to check those courses out. I'd highly recommend them. Again, if it's your first time accessing Learning Path, you'll have to enroll and join it. Just a couple of quick steps. And once you've joined the Learning Path, you can browse through all the e-courses in this webinar once available. Okay, thank you for attending today, and we hope you can join us for our next webinar. It will be member wellness and self-care, which yeah, that's a topic I'm pretty sure 100% of us could use. So we'll meet again on Wednesday, March 26, 2025, and the webinar will be held at the same time as this one, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Here's and well, so you can this registration is available on the campus if you'd like to register. You can go to the Vista campus calendar from the main menu. You'll see a blue or green dot that indicates an event for the day, and if you click on March 26th, you'll see the description of that webinar and the link to register as well. So also include that in a follow-up email that we'll send out tomorrow as well. I'll just include the registration link in case it's helpful. So we hope to see you there. But thank you so much for joining today's presentation and for your service. Thank you for all the chat responses, the poll questions, the word cloud was great, and just your participation throughout. Really loved it. This will conclude our webinar. We'll continue to look at the questions in the queue. I just want to thank Sharon so much. Thank you, Sharon, for being here and for all your guidance. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you all soon.